What's up, y'all? So I just got back from Disney. Took my daughter to Disney this week. Actually, last week Friday. I got back to Tuesday of this week, and I had an amazing time watching her having an amazing time. She's 2 years old. She went crazy when she saw Mickey and Minnie. So that was my enjoyment was seeing her enjoy herself. That was really great. And it's just her and I on the plane. It was a little nerve wracking. Taking a 2 year old on a 3 hour flight by myself was a little challenging, but we did it nonetheless. My little soldierette. So anyhow, I want to, I talked about classical conditioning, aka behaviorism, and I want to kind of like build on that a little bit more. And the foundation of classical conditioning is that organisms learn. It's a form of learning through association. So the brain learns through association and repeats the patterns, the learned patterns, and this is called behaviorism or psychology, behavioral psychology, psychology of behavior, behaviorism, classical conditioning, pretty much all synonymous of one of the same. And what I want to build on a little bit more is how the process, how the process works. Just kind of like elaborate on it some more. And it's our environment has stimulants. I mentioned this before. Our environment are packed with stimulants, and how classical conditioning works is that we are paired. A biological response, a natural response in organisms, become paired with a neutral stimulant. Let's say, for instance, a whistle, and you pair the whistle with the natural stimulant, which is, let's say, food, right? So if you pair the whistle with food, or the odor of food, every time you present the food to myself or to anyone or to anything, anytime you present the food, you present the sound of that whistle, the tone of that whistle. And what you're doing is the amygdala, which is part of the brain that's responsible for our emotions, as well as parts of the brain that stores memory, both long and short term. They What you're doing is you're actually storing in the psychology, in the memory bank of the psychology, that tone is associated with the odor of that food, which is a natural stimulant, because food stimulates a response in us, whether it's an appetite or if a salivation. You start to salivate. So you're pairing the tone of that whistle with the natural stimulant food, and every time you present that food, you present that same sound. What happens over a period of time on the brain and the psychology of the brain, the memory, the storage areas of the brain, and namely the amygdala, is that what happens is that now you are psychologically learning through association. Why? You're associating the sound of that whistle, the tone, with the odor of the food. And what happens is every time you hear that tone, you have a natural biological response, which is to develop a appetite, or all of a sudden start to salivate. For instance, if you're an animal like a dog, you salivate at the sound of the whistle without the actual odor of the food. This is called a conditioned response. And the whistle is called a conditioned stimulus because it has been paired with the odor of the food, steak, chicken, etc. And every time the whistle is blown, that whistle, the sound alone, elicits a specific response, hence a specific behavior, and that behavior and that response, the behavior and or response, is considered now a conditioned response. What was considered a natural biological response, hunger, is now considered a conditioned response or a conditioned behavior. Reason why it is conditioned, because you're now behaving in a particular way, a natural, particular biological way, however, without the natural stimulant, which is the food. The food has been removed from the scene, and all that is left is a whistle, yet you are still getting the same biological response as if the food was present. That is called a conditioned stimulant, which is or conditioned stimulus, which is the whistle, and a conditioned response, which is your natural biological hunger or salivation for food. And that, my friends, again, is the textbook 101 definition of classical condition, aka behaviorism. And when we understand and grasp that at a that was a very basic fundamental level, we can deduce from that more intricate, more dense, more complex methods or methodology of behaviorism or classical conditioning. So, as organisms, human beings, as the human species, we knowing this method of training or programming or conditioning or brainwave entrainment, we can begin to detach, disconnect, disassociate ourselves from the parents of our environments, whether that parent is done through McDonald's ads or Burger King ads or Nike ads or Facebook ads, or if you notice you're on your computer, you're always getting ads. These ads are constantly being bombarded on your feed or on your timeline. And all of this are forms of classical conditioning. We're being peered, or our brain is being taught through association. They are associating their products with certain natural biological stimulants that is inherent or innate within us, within the amygdala, within the memory banks of the brain, and are eliciting specific targeted responses. So when you get the desire or the urge to spend your dollar that you worked hard for on some product, consider whether you really want that product, whether you really like that product, or is there some form of conditioning that has went on below your level of awareness. So it's called subliminal entrainment, subliminal brainwave entrainment, right? So these are some of the things that we need to be aware of. If we have children, it's very important that as adults we understand this science, because everything in our environment, everything, every behavior, every vice, every act, every criminal act, everything that we see, every violent act, everything that happens in our environment, behind it there is a form of conditioning. Behind it there is a form of entrainment. Behind it there is a form of programming. Behind it there is a form or a type of classical conditioning. Trying to explain behavior from the perspective of a person's thoughts, feelings, emotions is pointless. It's pointless, absolutely pointless. Explaining behavior based off a person's thoughts is pointless. Based off their emotions is pointless. Based off their feelings is pointless. And reason being is, again, your behavior is a result of the stimulants in your environment and your association and interaction with those stimulants unbeknownst, unwittingly, and unconsciously or subconsciously to you. So unwittingly to you, unbeknownst to you, it is the stimulants that are placed in your environment that are associating learned behaviors within the amygdala and other areas of the brain that is responsible for your central nervous system, your actions, your deeds, everything that you are doing, that we are doing, we are being stimulated and having a conditioned response based off those things in our environment. So it is important. This is where the conversation also, out of this, we can spawn the conversation of nature versus nurture. And that is a debate that has gone on for centuries. And I'm on I wouldn't say I'm on the fence. I kind of lean towards nurture. I'm leaning more towards nurture which would be more in line with classical conditioning, because again, classical conditioning is predicated on learned behavior through association with one's environment, stimulants that are found in one's environment. So I am more leaning towards nature as opposed to just, no, excuse me, I'm leaning towards nurture, which would be more of the environment that one finds itself in, as opposed to just nature, which hangs its theory on genetics, on genes, having a dominant gene that gives you a leg up or an advantage over your competitor, or over the competition, or over others in your environment, other species and organisms in your environment. So I'm more leaning towards nurture, right, nurture, which has to do with the environment, which is more in line with classical conditioning, right? So it's like, again, it's very important that we are aware of our of the stimulants that's around us, right? What we have in our homes, what we have in our phones, what we have in our computers, what we have just around us on a regular basis, the environment that we work in, that we spend most of our times in. Being aware gives you a 90% advantage of being able to leverage this information, or leverage the environment, or use it wisely, and be productive, and strive, right? Finding your niche, so to speak. So again, classical conditioning, behaviorism, behavioral psychology. It's important, if we're parents, especially if we're parents, to understand these principles and precepts, and mostly to understand it for yourself, so that you can be in more control of you. You can be more aware of why you do the things you do, and what is the driving force or factor behind the deeds and the actions that we do. Till next time, Mark here, cooking books, bringing information. Peace.